I have a confession this morning. Some scriptures don't inspire me to say, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Chapter 7 of the story is one of them. We tend to keep the book of Joshua neatly tucked away, swept under the rug of our biblical living room. Rarely does it see the light of day, save for maybe Joshua's famous words to the Israelites who finally entered the promised land. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Otherwise, we have this brutal account of the war that the Israelites waged on the peoples who had unfortunately settled in a land unbeknownst to them, promised to another nation some 650 years before. The Israelites followed the terms of ancient holy war, which, among other things, includes total annihilation. Everything that breathes is killed. In great irony, note that Rahab the prostitute and her family and everyone associated with her are spared. It seems there's some breathing room at times in the terms. Rahab, by the way, we will find in Jesus' family tree. Don't believe me? Read Matthew chapter 1 this week. So we enter this book of Joshua today as he and the people enter the promised land after 40 years of wandering and waiting. While we may have been shocked at what God commands Israel to do in conquering and taking their covenant gift, we also read this week maybe the most riveting chapter in all the story. Joshua may be the earliest instance of a blitzkrieg, right? Before that word and idea even existed. The people enter the land, conquer Jericho and Ai, and make it all the way through a host of other cities. And then finally at the end, we come to the covenant renewal at Shechem. No glitches. Under their new leader, the Israelites carry out a nearly flawless military campaign. And in light of the bigger story, we should not be surprised at all. It was written into the plans all along. The people knew this was coming. This is a completion of sorts in the book of Joshua, the fulfillment of centuries-old covenants made with the people's ancestors. You know, because of the story's format, we don't get to see the names of the books unless we check in the back, of course, to see exactly what we're reading. So we may have missed that in the past 6 weeks, we have been reading through the Torah, a word that can be translated law, or even better, instruction. It's the first 5 books of the Old Testament, sometimes called the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moving to Joshua is moving into the next major section of the Hebrew Scriptures, the prophets in the synagogue today, or the history in our Christian Old Testament. But some biblical scholars actually say that Joshua belongs as part of the Torah as well. So instead of a Pentateuch, a collection of 5 books, we actually get a hexateuch, a collection of 6. Why would they say this? Well, because Joshua is the story of how the covenants with Abraham and Moses actually get fulfilled. This context matters greatly. Another important piece of context as well is who wrote Joshua. I saw 2 funny stories on Facebook this week that I wanted to share with you that show just how important the bigger picture really is. The first was the story of a preacher whose chosen message for the day was based on that great 90s anthem by the one-hit wonder Chumbawamba. Anyone remember it? I get knocked down, but I get up again. Never gonna keep me down. Good message, right? Yeah. Wrong. Because the very next words, if we know the songs, are pissing the night away. Because the man has just drank a whiskey drink, a vodka drink, a lager drink, and a cider drink, right? The context matters. Someone pointed this out to the preacher, who was a little embarrassed. The other story, I think, is even better. It was a photo from an actual daily Christian devotional. You know the kinds, and many of you might have them, the flip calendars that have a message or a message from Scripture each day. And on this particular day, on this beautiful piece of paper filled with flowers and meadows and a cross, were these words from Matthew chapter 4. All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. That was it. What makes this so deliciously ironic? Some of you know already. Those words were spoken by Satan to Jesus as he is tempted in the wilderness, right? Context matters greatly. When we read Joshua, we are reading the work of someone known as the Deuteronomic historian, or the DH for short, whose theology follows that of the book of Deuteronomy. The DH is important to know because he is one of at least 4 distinct authors that penned the works of the Old Testament. Now, his unmistakable theological voice will be found all the way through 2 Kings. We're going to read it all over the next couple of months. So what is that theology? Simply put, those who do good are rewarded by God, and those who do evil are punished by God. You'll notice the book of Joshua justifies the Israelites' military campaign of holy war because the people they kill are not innocent. Beginning in Genesis 15, first to Abraham, we hear the voice of the DH. Then, again, in parts of Exodus and Deuteronomy, his voice comes in again. These people are pretty awful. We've been told all along. Therefore, God will punish them. That leaves the winners on the other side, the Israelites. Now, the second reason for Israel's violent snatching of the land was to prove their God superior over other gods, so that nations would come to worship him. This is strung all the way throughout the Torah as well. That's the strong voice of a DH. But what is important to remember today is that this is not the only voice in the Old Testament. There are other voices that would reject his theology outright. Now, regardless, we're still left with a really difficult problem today. I hope you can tell my message thus far. I've really struggled with finding the good news in this book of Joshua. How could God possibly command the slaughter of innocents? I mean, isn't God opposed to that kind of thing? I mean, completely opposed? No doubt, through our journey of the story so far, we've already wrestled with God's upper story a lot, recognizing that God's ways are not our ways, and that God's thoughts are not our own, are higher than our own. And from our limited lower story perspective, there will necessarily be some things we're simply just not going to understand. But for me, that is just not a satisfactory answer to the puzzle that is Joshua. Why? Because words, despite the popular phrase that insists they do not, do hurt. They do tremendous harm. And sadly, even these words that make up the book of Joshua have been used throughout history by people of faith to justify the mistreatment of others, of another group. Read as if applying to them, they claim God condones their mistreatment and even murder of another group deemed heretical or evil or infidel. Too many cases dot our collective history, even in Christianity. Knowing Joshua's context can help us prevent this from happening again. Knowing it is the close of an epic written to show the superiority of the God of Israel over all, and how evildoers will be punished ultimately in the end. Other voices in the Torah, I said, have something to say back to this DH. Even in Leviticus, will be commanded of the Israelites fair and honorable treatment of the ger in Hebrew, which translates as the alien in your land. Scattered throughout the books of Moses will be a voice that insists on God's steadfast mercy and patience and long-suffering with sinners. And as we go from here, we too will quickly observe just how faithful and loving God is with this chosen people themselves, who, as we will see, will mess it up continually, time after time, over and over again, while God, even after some very tough love at times, never abandons them or forsakes them forever. So I wonder, where does the upper story meet our lower story today? What is the good news here if we insist rightly on saying that this is indeed the word of the Lord, Thanks be to God, even after a reading from the book of Joshua. Most of us, of course, will never face an army in our lives, but we will find ourselves in some battles, trying to get our footing again after a layoff, struggling with our children, trying to shape them to be good people in this world, people of faith and disciples of Christ, or wading through legions of grief and loss. We may not get cut down by a sword, but we do feel the sting of life. It is then that we hear God's word to Joshua and the people that God says no less than 4 times throughout their ordeal, be strong and courageous. That doesn't mean just grin and bear it, pretending as if we can do it all on our own. Just the opposite, in fact. It means admitting we can't do it on our own. It means admitting where the source of our courage and strength truly comes from. Here's what I mean. First, when the people lose one of the battles there around the city of Ai, that's A-I, it is because they failed in just one small piece of the law, if you remember from your story this week. So what do? Say we'll be sure to get it right next time and go on? No. They actually take a break from the whole military campaign and they sit down and have a Bible study, right? Joshua reads the entire Torah to them again. All right, we need to refresh ourselves, make sure that we are doing this right. Go to the Word, spend time in it, learn from the wisdom of God and from the people who've tried to live it before and have failed. A wonderful thing every single week here for someone to say, you know what? I have never grasped the Bible in this way. I've never read so much either. This is so exciting. That's what it's all about, getting excitement for the Word, because the Word translates out there. Second, we need to remember who's out in front. Remember, it is God who insists on going right to the front lines. The Ark of the Covenant goes before the people. Remember, there is no place that God is not with us, and no place we go, even through the valley of the shadow of death, where God has not been already. Third and finally is the challenge to be identified with God. For all of the difficulties in reading the book of Joshua, one of the most cringeworthy moments is the command for all the men to be circumcised before battle, right? Remember, these are the second and third generations after the Exodus. They must be marked as God's people. I ask us today, how are we marked as God's people, as Christ's people? That's a daily question we might do well to ask of ourselves. What about me? About my life, about my actions, my attitude, and my words makes me different from anyone else? What about me unmistakably identifies me as one of Christ's own? Our ritual, of course, is a little less painful. Okay, a lot less painful. Our ritual is baptism. It is putting to death the old self and putting on our new self, putting on Christ, to be changed from the inside out. Success by the world's standards is not guaranteed in this way of life, but success in God's eyes, losing ourselves in the service of each other, so that the Christ who lives in us can be seen by all. When that happens, we get new eyes, a new pair of glasses, if you will, that train us to see others, even those that are completely different from us, even those that completely disgust us, even those we'd rather not exist, as the children of God that they are. For without grace, none of us has a leg to stand on anyway. So be strong and courageous. We do not stand alone. That's some good news I can get behind today. That is truly good news. And Friedrich Buechner wrote, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid. Be strong and courageous." This is the word of the Lord. Together we say, thanks be to God.